No, don't build a plane while flying. That's a terrible way to create a tech startup. This airplane metaphor comes from Reid Hoffman, the co-founder of LinkedIn, who wrote, quote, "I believe that starting a company is like jumping off a cliff and assembling a plane on the way down. Your willingness to jump is your most valuable asset as an entrepreneur." Reid Hoffman is wrong. In fact, his willingness to jump is not even his most valuable asset. It's actually his ability to know whether the plane might fly. In other words, Hoffman has an intuitive sense for good startup ideas, and that is his most valuable asset. His quote reveals that he doesn't even recognize it. Only once you have a good idea is willingness to jump valuable, because pursuing a good idea is still scary. There is so much more to creating a successful startup beyond the initial idea. This is why the metaphor works, at least for special founders with built-in intuition like Hoffman. What's insidious is that the advice completely misleads normal founders. I know this personally. When I was doing my MBA at Berkeley, one of my professors was friends with Reid Hoffman, and he told us that exact quote. I listened to my professor and I jumped. I poured my heart and soul into my startup. God knows that I tried to build the plane while flying, but it crashed, and I got really hurt. It was one of the lowest points in my life. I was sitting alone in my apartment, and I realized that my startup would never work. And my bank account was so empty that I couldn't even cover the rent. So what went wrong? The problem is that I am a normal founder. I do not have that built-in intuition that Reid Hoffman has. Like most people, I cannot look at an airplane and know if it might fly. Just like most founders cannot think of a startup idea and know if it's a good idea. Most founders are not like Reid Hoffman. We need a way to know if we have a good idea. Without that knowledge, jumping is not a valuable asset. It's guaranteed disaster. I'm crashing! Splat! Yup, that's what it felt like. If only there were a way for founders to evaluate an idea for a tech startup, to decide quickly whether an idea is a distraction or an opportunity worth pursuing. Good news! Now there is. Here's to more flying and less splatting. Welcome to the Nascent podcast. I'm Mike Vladimir, and I am obsessed with startups with no customers. A good idea is the foundation of a successful startup. But good ideas are hard to recognize, so entrepreneurs often waste years before giving up on an idea. Nascent is a strategy to overcome this challenge. This is episode 24. No, don't build the plane while flying. Instead, use the chain of success. For an airplane to fly, it requires a lot of things to go right. Just like for a startup to succeed, a lot of things need to go right. I want to take a step back and think about how the entrepreneurship community focuses on successful startups where everything went right. Let's talk about how we got here. The conventional approach to startups focuses on the race to the top. As founders, we talk about the unicorns, the billion-dollar exits, because that's what we want too. I remember about 10 years ago when everyone in Silicon Valley was talking about a chart by the market intelligence firm CB Insights. The chart shows the logos of uniform startups growing over time. At first, in 2010, there are a few unicorns, and you could see their logos, kind of sparse. And then around 2015, the unicorns become more common, and the logos start to fill up. And then by 2017, there were so many logos that it basically didn't even fit on the chart. It's now 2026, and over the past few years, there have been on the order of 100 unicorns per year. Way more logos than would fit on that chart. As founders, we want to be in that elite group. If you are counting unicorns, then 100 might seem like a lot, right? But as a percentage of startups, it's actually tiny. Our perspective is skewed. This is reinforced by investors who leverage the power law in startups. For VCs, venture capitalists, most of their return on investment comes from just a few companies with outsized outcomes. So let's look at the distribution of outcomes for tech startups that had an exit in the past few years. I'm basing my analysis in part on the work of Jared Heyman, a managing partner at Rebel Fund. Links to his articles in the show notes. I want to call out that an exit usually means some kind of liquidity event, such as an acquisition or an initial public stock offering on the stock market, where founders and investors get a big payout. This is what investors like Rebel Fund focus on. But I have a different focus, so I'm also including startups where the payout was zero. For folks listening, we're looking at a graph of the distribution of startup outcomes for a given year. I've created a Miro board where you can see it, link in the show notes. So every year, about 100 startups have a liquidity event of more than $1 billion. That's awesome. And then there are about 1,000 more companies with exits around $100 million. And then about 10,000 startups get exits of about $10 million. Most founders I know would love to have any of these exits. Let's look at the distribution pattern. Each tier drops by 10x in outcome. $1 billion down to $100 million, down to $10 million. And each tier has 10x more startups. 100 startups, up to 1,000 startups, up to 10,000 startups. This pattern is the power law of startup outcomes. What is overlooked is the sheer mass at the bottom of this distribution. Every year, something like 1 million tech startups shut down and their founders have nothing to show for it. This is what I call a $0 exit. Here's how I'm thinking about this. To start, I'm talking about all the startups that apply to Y Combinator and Techstars and all the other startup accelerators around the world. As a benchmark, YC alone gets 40,000 applications per year, and 99% of those startups are rejected and have $0 exits. There are also startup competitions like Demolicious in Portland and entrepreneurship programs at universities like USC in Los Angeles. And of course, there are lots of tech startups that don't touch any of these programs. It is great that founders can get support for their startups. And at the same time, it's also true that most startups end in failure, in $0 exits, regardless of how much support they get. So if we add up all the startups globally, I think that comes to about 1 million startups a year. Almost all of these have $0 exits. So far, I've been showing this distribution using a log scale, which doesn't provide a true sense of proportion. So let me try that again with a bar. For folks listening, this is also on Nascent's Miro board. What you're seeing is that the winners, the $1 billion exits, the $1 million exits, these startups are just a tiny sliver. They make up just 1% of the outcomes each year. Although these are 1% of the outcomes, it feels to me like they're probably 99% of the discussion. These winners are what founders focus on. And then there are the losers. The bottom 99% of startups with $0 exits that are essentially overlooked. I would estimate they get maybe 1% of founders' focus. And even then, when a founder tells a failure story, it usually has a happy ending. It goes something like, "My startup wasn't working, and here's how I turned everything around." Let's be clear, failure sucks. I know this personally. I've created 10 startups and they all ended this way. I don't have an amazing track record of exits under my belt. When the plane crashes, it really hurts. I've talked with leaders of entrepreneurial support organizations about this, and everyone seems to accept that so many startups fail. And you know what? I'm fine with it too. Not every startup idea is going to be successful. In fact, most won't. Lots of founders are going to try to create startups, and most will fail. Honestly, I would love to see more founders creating tech startups, even if it means more failures, more planes that won't fly. Why just 1 million startups a year? Why not 10 million? Where I'm a contrarian is in the duration of the projects. It takes about 9 years for a startup to achieve a $1 billion exit. And a lot happened over those 9 years. So kudos to those founders for sticking to it and inspiring the rest of us. But I'm not worried about the winners. I'm worried about the losers. What kills me are the startups who spent a year working super hard and they have nothing to show for it. Everyone else seems fine with 1 million startups each wasting a year before the founders recognize that they're pursuing a bad idea and giving up. 1 year of time for a $0 outcome. I do not accept this. Again, I can accept that most startups will fail. That's the nature of the universe. That's entropy. We cannot control the rate of failure, but we can control how much time we waste. If the chances of the airplane flying are doubtful, then let's discover it at 3 feet above the ground and not the way it works today at 30,000 feet. Falling from so high after putting in so much effort is what makes the crash and burn so horrible for so many founders. I believe that there's a huge opportunity for improvement, that as founders we can get an earlier signal to make better use of our limited time. My goal with Nascent is for founders to use this strategy to drive a massive 10x reduction in the time that they waste on bad ideas, from a year down to just 1/10 of a year. In other words, days. If a startup's chances of success are doubtful, meaning that it will likely end in a $0 exit, for the love of God, let it happen in days, not years. Let the fall be a 3-foot fall, which is still painful, but you can recover, and not the 30,000-foot fall that really damages you. To achieve this outcome, I want to take success and flip it on its head. In order to achieve success, a startup needs a lot of things to go right. Without everything going right, the startup fails. $0 exit. On an airplane, you can see everything that needs to work. The plane needs wheels to be able to land. It needs seatbelts to keep the passengers from bumping around. It needs wings to generate lift. All of this and much more needs to go right for a successful flight. But the inner workings of business are hidden. This is why Nascent strategy includes a framework called the chain of success to illustrate these hidden factors. For folks listening, you can see the chain of success on the Miro board. Again, link in the show notes. Your startup needs a chain of success to succeed. One link in the chain represents how your startup needs paying customers. Another link shows how you'll need a team to build the business. And there's a link for the product that you need to sell to the customers, and for marketing and sales and legal and much more. Link after link after link in the chain of success. Earlier, when we were talking about the distribution of outcomes, the winners, all those green bars in the top 1% with the big payouts, for those startups, all of the links in the chain of success held. None of the links broke. The chain of success did not break. Hooray for those founders. But they are not my focus. I am trying to take success and flip it on its head. What I care about is the red bar on the graph, the million startups with $0 exits. What I care about is that if any link in the chain of success breaks, then the startup fails. In other words, last year, 1 million startups ended in a $0 exit. Why? Because at least one of the links broke in their chain of success. It only takes one broken link to cause the $0 exit. The chain of success framework reveals 2 crucial strategic points for you as a founder of a startup with no customers. The first point is fragility. It is really easy for this chain to break and to deliver you a $0 exit. There is a huge risk that all of your work will come to nothing. Which leads to the second takeaway from the chain of success. Since the chain is so fragile, your strategy should not be to complete a link, to fully land a customer, to build a complete product, to recruit a team member to join your team. There is too high a chance that your work will be for nothing. Instead, you should get a signal as early as possible about whether the chain might hold. After all, why work on something that's doomed to fail? And why jump when there is no reason to believe that the plane even has a chance of flying? Nobody wants a splat. There are lots of links in the chain, and they are not all equal. As founders, it is so easy to try to do everything at once when you're building your startup. There are so many events and blog posts and YouTube videos about how important it is for you to work right now and recruit your team members and build your product and write your marketing plan to get your first customers and so on. This advice is harmful to founders of startups with no customers. Right now, you just want to focus on the riskiest link in the chain of success. All of the other links are distractions. So which link in the chain of success should you focus on? The link that is most likely to break. And which link has the highest chance of causing that unfortunate $0 exit? Good news, we have an answer. Over the last 20 years, the data is clear and consistent. The biggest risk to a startup is whether it can get paying customers. This is according to many sources such as CB Insights and Tom Eisenman, who's a professor at Harvard Business School who wrote the book, Why Startups Fail. Your startup will not fail because you incorporated the wrong way. Your startup won't fail because you split equity unfairly with your co-founders. Your startup won't fail because your accounting system malfunctioned. The most common failure mode is that founders create something that nobody cares about. In other words, all of your effort should focus on getting a signal whether that first riskiest link can hold, whether your startup might get customers. The chain of success says that if you can get a signal that paying customers are possible, only then could it be worth your while to invest in recruiting the team and building the product and writing the marketing plan and everything else that goes into creating the startup. To be clear, a signal that it is possible for your startup to get customers still means you have a ton of work to do. Launching a startup is still scary, and your willingness to jump really will be a valuable asset. But if you get a signal that paying customers are doubtful, then you can save yourself time. Last year, 1 million startups had $0 exits at a huge opportunity cost to their founders. If those founders are like the folks who I mentor, then they probably wasted a year or more on their projects and have nothing to show for it. If the founders would have prioritized their work using the chain of success, then they could have avoided most of that waste. All of the time that you would have wasted recruiting a team, building a product, and writing a marketing plan. All of the time talking to investors and figuring out how to split equity with your co-founders. And all of the other distractions. This is what makes up the bulk of the year of wasted effort. Another way to think about the chain of success is to apply it to a medical context. Let's say that instead of being a founder considering startup ideas, instead let's say that you're a doctor trying to triage soldiers after a battle. A few soldiers are going to live, but most will die. That's the nature of battle. As a doctor, you want to put your effort into saving soldiers that have a chance to live and not waste time on soldiers that are going to die no matter what. The chain of success applies here too. So let's say that you're in the battlefield and you walk up to your first wounded soldier and you ask, "What's wrong?" And they say their chest hurts because they have a gunshot wound, and their finger hurts because they have a paper cut, and their tummy hurts because they have a bellyache, and they have a stub toe, and so on. Each of these conditions is a link in the chain of success, and here success would mean saving that soldier's life. We can use the chain of success to ask that same key question. As a doctor, do we deal with all of these conditions equally? No! Forget about everything other than the gunshot wound. Where is it? Did it hit their heart? Is this person savable, or are they going to die? Any effort that you put into treating the paper cut and the bellyache is a distraction. Only after you know that their heart might work should you even consider putting effort into anything else. And if you identify that the soldier cannot survive that gunshot wound, then you just saved yourself a huge opportunity cost that you would have spent treating the paper cut and the bellyache and everything else. Instead, you can use that valuable time to move on and treat another wounded soldier. I only wish that founders triage their startup ideas the same way that doctors triage soldiers, so that they could better allocate their effort and avoid so much waste. To be clear, getting a signal does not mean actually getting customers, or even pre-sales or smoke tests or letters of intent. Those are conventional strategies that require too much work, and that's what's driving founders to waste a year on a bad idea, which is exactly what we're trying to avoid. through the lens of Nascent, all of that is a distraction. The lightweight, useful signal that you need is going to come from speaking with people in pain and using that data to calculate the price that they might pay for a product. As we discussed in episode 22, you want to develop this extra sense, this new sense to detect people in pain, because people in pain provide the first signal that your startup might eventually get customers. And then in episode 23, we said, when you speak with those people in pain, it's not enough for you to ask good questions. Founders need an effective, repeatable way to process the data from the conversations, from those discovery interviews, to be able to drive a decision. So in addition to the chain of success framework, Nascent also includes a structured way to go from recorded conversations to an earning value, the estimated revenue next year from the ground up with no customers today. As we discussed in episode 19, the earning value, spelled ERNY, is how Nascent quantifies an idea for a startup in dollars. We'll get into the mechanics of calculating earning in future episodes. What matters is that earning allows you to achieve your goal of predicting the $0 outcome. Nobody wants a $0 outcome, but if it's going to happen, let's identify it early. If the project is going to fail, if the plane is going to crash, let it be from 3 feet and not from 30,000 feet. So how can we predict a $0 outcome? It's when your earning value is $0, meaning that if you build the project the way it currently stands, you are about to create something that nobody cares about. I want to be clear that an earning value of $0 is not a death sentence for your startup. In fact, the earning value for most startups begins at $0, and it's actually something you can work on and try to increase by speaking with more people in pain and trying to discover more expensive, excruciating problems. And if you do that work and you keep speaking with people and your earning value stays at 0, the signal comes from the diminishing returns. That is the predictor of the $0 outcome. That's the signal that the plane won't fly, so you should not jump. The chain of success is a prioritization framework that enables you to focus on getting an early, lightweight signal and to disregard everything else. The chain of success also applies to the visible world of Reid Hoffman and his airplane metaphor. Quote, "Starting a company is like jumping off a cliff and assembling a plane on the way down." We can see how all the airplane parts need to work together, the wings and the wheels and the seatbelts and everything else, in order for the plane to fly successfully. In Hoffman's metaphor, you are trying to build a plane and you've got nothing. And you better fly soon because you just jumped off a cliff. So, do you build everything at once? No! You need to prioritize. Okay, then what should you build first? The wheels and the seatbelts are distractions. They will not determine whether your plane flies. You should focus on only one thing, the wings. The plane only has a chance of flying if the wings can generate lift. Otherwise, splat. Until your wings generate even the tiniest bit of lift, you are wasting your time putting effort into the seatbelt and anything else. For airplanes, the most important thing to do is to measure the lift generated by the wings. And for startups, the most important thing to do is to identify people in pain and to measure that pain in dollars. I believe that many founders have willingness to jump, and that those jumps will yield much better results if founders use a measurement system that approximates Reid Hoffman's intuition for good startup ideas. So what does the chain of success mean for you? Simplify, do less. Right now, while your startup has no customers, you have a huge opportunity. All you need to do is just focus on getting a signal about the startup's potential to get customers. To do this, go record one conversation with anybody who you think could benefit from your startup. We'll cover this more in future episodes, but recording is fundamental to Nascent. Only recorded conversations count. Not your memory, not your notes. So go record a conversation and email me about it. On that note, I want to thank listeners for continuing to provide feedback and contacting me. In this episode, I'm sharing a message from Michael, who wrote me, quote, "I think you should point out where you start, episode 19. If somebody sees one of your popular videos, they might be confused if they haven't started at the beginning." Michael went on to say, "These episodes are like a good audiobook to me, but only because I started from the beginning. Still, they're useful by themselves." That really warms my heart. Thank you so much. I haven't said it yet, but a good audiobook is exactly what I'm trying to create with this podcast right now. And that's also really helpful feedback. I kept the first 18 posts from 2024 and 2025. I kept them live for posterity. Going forward, I will add to the show notes that new listeners should start at episode 19. So thanks, Michael. If this podcast gave you a new way to think about startups, then please, I hope you'll share this episode with another founder who is struggling to focus. And I also hope that you will subscribe and leave a rating, since that is so important. And you're welcome to contact me via email at podcast@nascentidea.com or on X by tweeting @nascentidea. Okay, entrepreneurs, let's avoid distractions. You got this.